as we talk a lot about here at Third Stage, it's absolutely critical to select the right partners and to really understand the roles of each partners within your implementation or overall digital transformation project. So with that, I am very excited to welcome Amanda to our conversation today. So Amanda, can you tell our audience just a little bit about who you are, your background, and your role here at Third Stage?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I am Amanda Patton. I am a director here at Third Stage, and I'm relatively new to this role, but I have been working with Third Stage in multiple capacities as a senior consultant and a manager for the past 3 years and some change. I come from the software vendor side, where I did industry manager work and then also analyst relations. And so I've got the advantage of getting to see things from all these different, vantage points. But as a director at Third Stage, one of my main mandates is to leverage and grow our relationships with partners out in the ecosystem and from a PMO perspective. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting role to be in, and we are directing the work, I guess. So we're assembling the team, we're scoping the projects, we're selecting, partners. The client actually is selecting the partners, but we're helping them, advising them on selecting not only the software vendor, but the partner who's going to help them implement it.
Absolutely. And well, first and foremost, congratulations. And thank
Thank
you so
you.
much for joining our great team here. I know you've been on some of our podcasts and in our thought leadership for a while now, but it's very exciting to welcome you formally as you are now kind of a leader on the Third Stage team. So we're very fortunate to have your background. And as you mentioned, you have this unique perspective on being on both sides, from not only being on the vendor side of the business, which we have a variety of team members that were also understanding and having a deeper understanding of those advisory or alliance services and those relationships with partners that are, say, independent or technology agnostic, like Third Stage, or just the overall partner situation and perspective. With that, knowing that kind of your situation, how important would you say from a top line is it to understand the roles of each partner within an implementation project?
There's nothing more important from my perspective, because if you don't plan and really sit down, slow down, take a breath, and plan, do the planning on the front end, or you're going to kind of pay for it later. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But regarding the question you just asked, it's very important that we all have a very clear scope. And I understand as Third Stage where my lane is. You understand as the vendor where your lane is, as the system integrator, so that we aren't competing or creating more work for the client. And just also so we have a seamless project. We have a clearly defined scope of work, which of course is flexible as the project moves forward. But I say that if you skip that part, there's just going to be a lot of confusion, and maybe infighting or even competition that just doesn't need to happen. At the end of the day, we're all on the same team. We have all agreed to work hard together toward the outcome, which is a successful implementation for the client. And so we've got to check our egos at the door and come in and all decide which parts of the project we are in charge of. And then you need that PMO, vision that kind of overarches and ties everything together. So I would say it's critical.
Absolutely. And, knowing what each role does is super important too. So say you are, working with a client that's really in their phase zero era of planning their digital transformation. They're kind of just laying the groundwork, which is where we always recommend engaging an independent digital transformation coach so that you really can get into the strong foundation of project planning. So, what are some considerations you need to keep in mind when "quote unquote" interviewing potential implementation partners?
The first thing I think is just kind of the obvious. Are they experts in that system? Do they have references? Do they have a good reputation? Have you talked to people who they've implemented for? How did it go? So that's obviously, if we're interviewing anybody, a contractor for something at our house, like we're going to want to talk to people. How did they do on your bathroom repair? So that seems pretty obvious. But then you need to look at things like budget. You need to look at timeline. You need to look at cultural fit. Do we get along? Do we work well together? Do we all respect each other? And I would say also part of the cultural fit, I guess a subset of that would be, um, the client is in charge, and people forget that. And it's important. And we're always reminding our customers, our clients, this is your implementation. You determine the timeline, you determine the pace. And so making sure that you've got a vendor and a system integrator who is respectful of that and who will work with you instead of, forcing timelines or products or things that you may or may not be on board with. So for me, I think those are first of all, do you know what you're doing? How good are you at implementing the system? And then people overlook the cultural stuff, like a soft issue, like something that, it's whatever, we'll figure it out. It's really important. It's really important.
And understanding kind of, I think a lot of misperceptions around that is you actually do have choices. So can you talk about kind of options that you have when looking at an implementation partner? How should you consider kind of making sure that you understand the landscape of the space and what partners you should look at engaging?
I mean, our favorite line is it depends. Uh,
Yeah.
but it depends because there are some systems like, you know, well, I don't want to name names, but there are some where you have partners, you have an implementation partner on every corner for said system.
Exactly. Yeah.
So your search may be a little more overwhelming. And so for me, I think you need to get references and get referrals from people in your industry that you talk to. And that happens all the time where people are references or it's like, okay, you're a mid-market manufacturer and you implemented this and you guys used this partner and they did a fantastic job. I would rather go on something like that than go out to the market and tell me and see what the marketing materials tell me who the top three implementers of that solution are, right? I want to talk to a real person who's done that. So that would be one thing. I think also having a third party involved, whether it's third stage or someone else, to make sure that you have someone who is advocating for you, who has your back. Um, you know, I'm not saying anybody's malicious or trying to be a bad person, but like we all have self interest that we're serving out in the world. And vendors want to sell more software, and implementers want to implement more software. And so it's important that you've got somebody in the mix that will give you honest feedback. Um, and again, I think word of mouth and talking to people. And a lot of times it's very interesting because these C-suite, these executives that we work with, they will reach out to people, peers, competitors, even, and have conversations. And in that conversation, they're usually going to get the good, bad, and the ugly. But I'd much rather have a real live example. Than going to some ranking system out on the internet that may or may not be true. And just because they're the top implementer for that solution doesn't mean they're the top implementer for your organization. I think it's really important to talk to people in your industry around your size who may need some of the same nuanced secret sauce type of stuff that your business is going to need. Um, That's my 2 cents.
Oh yeah, and you said so much in there. I always call it a watch back. So if you are watching, definitely take that back and take it step by step. But there's so much good information in there. One, understanding that everyone has an agenda. And I love how PC you are too. Like, everyone has an agenda. Their job is to sell you software. Their job is to implement. That's how they make their money. That's how their business model runs. So, no, they're not terrible people, but they do have an agenda of what that looks like. And we talk a lot, and the example of you gave about kind of the different entities within the industry. We have D365, Microsoft Dynamics D365 or 365 as number one on our top 10 ERP systems. So there's a lot of great things about them. Another kind of drawback behind them or an issue we see is just the consistency in the marketplace because there are so many third party resellers, and you really need to make sure you get the right partner that not only fits your requirements, your needs, has the experience. And then also that referral muscle or that referral network that you really can engage and flex upon. We have a lot of businesses that we may work with through a PMO project that their direct competitor will then call us up and say, hey, we're looking to do X, Y, and Z. And we're like, wait, we thought though you guys didn't like each other. But knowing that you have that industry experience and that expertise in a similar business is just so critical to ensuring that all makes sense. One thing I really want to kind of dig into that you touched upon and expand upon is the cultural piece of it. And you had mentioned that that is kind of a soft metric. If you have all of this extensive experience, but it may not be a culture fit, is that a huge red flag? Or is that just kind of a consideration that you say, they may not jive with our team so much, but they do check all the boxes on the technical side? What's the balance there?
It depends. um, Look, if you first of all, I have to be honest and say that it is not consistent. You might have a fantastic implementation with with a vendor or with a system integrator in Ohio. And then you may 6 months later do a very similar implementation with the same vendor, same SI in California, and it's not good at all. So that's one thing to know. They run by territories. You can't pick your favorite team and have them do all your stuff all over the world. Unfortunately, wherever they are, that's who's going to get deployed, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where you're located. And so I want to just say that first of all, there's never any vendor or SI who always does a great job or always does a terrible job. It's just not that simple, for one thing. So I'll give you an example. One of the implementations that I've done in the last couple of years, we had 4 vendors in the hunt. RFPs came back, 2 of them kind of advanced, into demos. And so they had their showdown. And from a scoring perspective, these 2 vendors pretty much were neck and neck. Do you know what I mean? And even in the negotiation phase, and we're talking about price, they got to where they were, within very little money of each other, right? So at this point, you're looking at it like this is a really tough one. And the client ended up going for the better cultural fit, right? So that's an easier situation. But if you've got 4 vendors and it's narrowed down to 3 or 2, one of them is like A plus and the rest of them are B or C, but the A plus is not a cultural fit. That's a tougher spot to be in, a couple of questions. So the balance is, for me, really understanding that you're going to be in a kind of a marriage with this vendor. This is a very long-term commitment with an ERP system, right? Or 10, 20, 30 years. I don't know. I'm not married, so I don't, I'm just kidding though. But really it is a relationship. So at some point, the implementation team, all of us, everybody's going to roll off the project. And then guess who's going to have to be in relationship together for a long time? So if it's irreconcilable, that's going to be a really big problem. The other thing is the sales team. Maybe you don't get along really well with the sales team. Well, that's not who's going to be doing your implementation. So it's really hard. It's really hard to know. I've had instances before where certain vendors or SIs were borderline condescending because they're up on all the newest technology. They live and breathe the technology and it's all modern. And then you walk into a manufacturing facility where they've been running the same green screen legacy hotkey for 36 years. And they may not know a lot about technology, but they know more about manufacturing than anybody. And you've got some people, some vendors or SIs who are a little bit, can be a little bit arrogant. And that doesn't go over very well. And so, again, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. But you have to also remember that sales team, once they close the deal, they're gone. They're on to the next. So it could be that you're going to get along great with professional services, the implementation team or the SI or whoever. So I didn't really answer your question because it's a case by case. I think it's very important.
Really? No, you did. Our favorite answer. It depends because it truly does. And that's the point, as I always say, of those questions is really looking at that this is going to be your implementation. And you touched a little bit on project ownership. But I wonder, kind of as a follow up to that question, if you could expand on the importance of internalizing project ownership.
You mean for the client or for?
Yes. So the importance, we talk a lot here at Third Stage about not losing yourself to what the vendor says
Oh,
or what your partner or implementation partner, because that can be really something that's difficult, right? They are the experts. You want to lean on their support, but in some level, if you get too entrenched, either from a resource perspective or from a monetary perspective, you can really be in that trouble point that you had kind of just touched on. So I want to kind of explain to the audience from your perspective of the importance of understanding the project ownership and the internalization of the overall strategy.
I hope this doesn't sound self-serving, but I'm going to say it again. You need to have some type of neutral party involved, whether it's Third Stage or some other, like whoever, that's not the client and it's not the vendor and it's not the system integrator. It's someone else who can kind of look at the whole big picture, because what happens is if you're in manufacturing, let's say aerospace and defense, oil and gas, whatever, pick an industry, maybe you don't know a lot about ERP software. And so it's very easy to defer all of your decisions to the experts, the vendors, the SIs, whatever. The problem with that is if somebody's selling you more than you need or telling you the software does XYZ and maybe it doesn't do it exactly the way without $30,000 worth of customizations, let's say, like these are the things that you can easily be, and I hate to make it sound like vendors or anybody are doing anything bad, but it's easy to be manipulated or misled or sold to. What we say a lot to clients is you don't need that yet. You're not ready for that type of functionality. That's a phase 3 thing. Let's stay focused over here. Let's keep the scope and the budget, so that would be, for me, the most important part, because if you don't, the project could run away without you. Like I have seen that where clients find themselves on this merry-go-round and they can't get off of it because they sort of handed the keys over to the system integrator or the vendor or whatever. And then you've got scope creep, you're over budget, you've got all these customizations that you've got to now maintain. And then later you find out maybe you didn't even need those customizations necessarily. So That's why it's important. You've got to have the ownership, the steering committee, the leadership, the business process owners at every single level of the organization have got to have a seat at the table. Um, and sometimes, all the time, everyone at these companies are doing their day job. They're really busy, you know? And so sometimes it's easier to defer or to say, oh, we don't really know. You guys just, tell us what's best practice. What do other oil and gas companies do type of deal. Um, that's a mistake. You need to know your process, and your people have to have a seat at the table to say, well, that may be best practice for the industry, but that's not how we do it. And can the software meet us where we are in this area? So yeah, it's really really important. And I think a lot of times, people are just too trusting. That's one of the reasons why project management and PMO is so important, because every move that anyone makes needs to be documented. A lot of times, especially being on, we've been involved in many expert witness, documentation is key. And so, if you're from a PMO perspective, any change order, anytime something on the critical path gets into the yellow zone and it's communicated to the SI or the vendor and it's not handled in a timely manner, which is their end of the deal, right? They're part of the contract. And as we know, anytime you want to get out of a contract, it can get pretty litigious. And that's never where we want to go. But those are resources that we, have had to use, that clients have had to use. So I would say, as just an add-on to that, is just to make sure that you're documenting everything, the conversations, the changes, and obviously correspondence with the vendors and system integrators. And that if things aren't being delivered that were part of your contract, part of their scope of work, then you need to have a paper trail showing that.
Well, and that's so easy to do, especially if you actually, made a financial commitment and you feel as though your statement of work and contract lays out all of the different areas in which this supportive relationship will be. But if you don't have kind of that insurance policy, as we call it, of those independent advisors that are dedicated to your business goals, their success is going to
Right.
be your success in that piece, then you really need that ability to kind of manage through that. So I know you touched a little bit on kind of third stage PMO, or having an independent and technology agnostic PMO, but we kind of touched on some of our recent thought leadership of just not only the saturation of niche products, of interoperability products, of platform based, all of these different solutions. So you have all of that, but then you also have all of these agendas and different pieces that you're managing. So our PMO, we call it mission control, is our mission control here kind of takes that all, think of a mission control for a rocket ship, and has kind of the control levers of the project all in one place. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and the importance of having that kind of one lighthouse of a PMO resource on a project?
We all come in with our own plan, right? Client knows what they're looking for. The vendor, everybody has their own thing, and it's like, if I'm building a house, um, and I have 17 contractors handling their specialty area, I need a foreman. I need a GC to kind of see everything together, the budget, the timeline, quality of the deliverables, and making sure that things like, and I'll switch back to the analogy of, away from the house building and toward, what we do, which is, data migration and training and, are we resourcing this project appropriately? Well, what if I'm only looking at that through the third stage lens? What if I'm only looking at it through the software vendor lens or the SI lens or the client lens? Well, that's what happens, right? Like, we want to say that we're looking at the big picture, but when you get caught up in the minutia of an implementation, it's easy to lose sight of the big picture and to really drill, because we have deliverables, we have demo, we have all kinds of stuff going on. We're really busy, and it gets hard to keep a big, picture view. And so to answer your question, we are going to look at all of that. We're going to manage really program management because we're managing many, many projects within a project. Um, and we're neutral, right? Again, we don't have an agenda. We don't care who you go with from a vendor or an SI perspective, as long as they make you happy as the client. Does it fit your business requirements, your timeline, your budget, your culture? Will you achieve the business outcomes that you're setting out to achieve? Like, that's what we care about. Um, so for me, it's easy to get off into rabbit holes because these things get very complicated. They really do. And then you're bringing in other bolt-ons, and you've got a data migration team over here, and it gets out of control very quickly. And so you really need somebody who's looking at the whole part, and calling out risk before they turn into issues, right? Not just in our little world of third stage, but in the whole world of the project. And there's, you know, um, and it's cool because we're not seen as the good cop or the bad cop, or we're just sort of the neutral observer, right? We're doing things, we're managing things, we're alerting to risk, and we're planning and all that kind of stuff. But if we say, hey, what's going on over here? If this falls behind, these other 7 things are going to fall behind. It doesn't feel like, it's not like an attack or anything. It's just an observation. That's what we're doing. That's why we're there. That's what PMO does. So
Absolutely. And having a resource that has that 10,000-foot view of the project, because a lot of times you can get so hyper focused as an internal team on one area that's in the green, this is going awesome, but then shifting over to maybe an organizational assessment or a different piece in which you're like, oh, this is not actually performing at the level that we wanted it to perform at. But investing in that resource that can kind of see and then manage 2 partners and have the insight to managing 2 partners. Because it's one thing, to feel as though you have that internal capability of, oh, I can manage outside vendors. That's a very normal process within our business. But have you done it for an actual software implementation? Because there's nuances to that. You mentioned something like data migration, which is a huge piece of a digital transformation. And that's something that you need to at least have that phase 0 side of, and that implementation plan around, but also being able to execute it in the way that you're going to have that visibility. So I think that that's really, really critical, to understanding that. And mission control is something a lot of times we do post election, just because we've had such a great relationship with a client or our partners, and just moving through the synergy of the group. We call it, getting the band back together type of thing. So knowing the synergistics that we bring to it, and I know you know this well, Amanda, because you're not only one of our most top requested resources, but you also, you're not to be trifled with on the vendor side, right? So can you kind of talk about the way that third stage kind of works with our different partners in that area, and the importance of not only setting expectations, but having this energy to innovate and solve critical problems that are going to come up 100% of the time within a digital transformation project.
my loyalty is always to the client. And as long as I remember that, that makes my job, well, not easy, but it makes my job clear. I know I need to remember what my objective is. And I need to keep my ear close to the ground enough to know when something isn't right across all the partners and all the projects and all the subsets of projects and all the things, but not be in the weeds. I've got to also be able to see, the big picture. And then we have to be willing to be creative. We have to be willing to pivot if something isn't working. Um, we have to be able to have tough conversations with the client sometimes, or with the vendor or the SI. We are looking for problems, identifying problems before they become, especially critical path, right? Before they have the ability to derail the project from any perspective, time, money, accomplishing what the client wants. And when we see inconsistencies between what was sold and what is being delivered, or anything else that causes issues for the client, we are their advocate. Because again, that relationship between the vendor and the client is going to be long term. That's a marriage that's going to go on long after we're, there. And so they need to learn how to work through their problems, through their disagreements, and make changes as necessary. But you've got to be willing to be creative too, and to say no, and to push back, and to say, that's not going to work for us. And you hear it all the time in Eric's videos and different people, saying, do not let software squish you into some kind of box. At the end of the day, probably 80% of the functionality is the same, like in most of these but then it depends, right? Are you a process manufacturer? Are you in apparel? What is it that you're doing? And you need that specialty sometimes. And sometimes it's not with the vendor who's standing up your ERP system. Sometimes it is some type of, specialty, composable ERP, as we've been talking about a lot. And again, an SI, a vendor may have their plan for you when they come in, and that may not be the best plan. So I think having the ability and the confidence to speak up for your business and say, we appreciate your advice and we understand what you're saying, but for us, we're not going to change this process. We're going to keep this process the way it is, and we need your software to accommodate us instead of the other way around. And then have somebody to have your back, right? Third stage, have somebody to enforce that and to make sure that the client is protected. And 9 times out of 10, everybody plays very nicely together. But when they don't, we can deal with that too.
Yeah. Help to troubleshoot. I think one of our clients said it great in a case study we did of really healing the relationship. If there is a relationship you're really struggling with, third stage a lot of times can come in and help triage that. That's the goal, right? To keep everyone together and to move timelines, you know, or make the project healthy again. So the final thoughts here, Amanda, that I want to ask you about is if you do feel as though you're in a situation where the partner is not working, as kind of a conclusion to this conversation, what are some things you can do as a business to address that when you have an actual partner that may not be in the best standing, or you don't feel as though you have that synergy with them? What are some troubleshooting tactics?
The first thing I would advise is to meet with your neutral advisors. Like when we're involved and this comes up, it's a conversation with the client and us of let's just really take stock of what's going on, so that we understand. Sometimes it could be the specific team, for that SI. Other times, maybe it's just the SI in general that it's just not gonna, work. And then you've got to start thinking about, renegotiating or getting out of certain agreements. Um, that can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. I haven't been involved in too many of those. Generally, when that comes up, we are able to salvage the relationship and to get back on track. We may need to switch out some people. We may need to make some changes on a team level. But, that would be my first advice, is to, consult with us first, and then maybe we go talk to them, to the vendor or the SI, on the client's behalf. But it really just depends on what the problem is. What are the problems? What's the issue? Sometimes it can be salvaged, and um, sometimes maybe not. But when you enter into contracts with people, you know, it's not always easy to untangle from them.
Absolutely. It's actually one of the hardest things to do. And we know that a lot from our expert witness work, which is why, that prep work and understanding those, again, nuances of being quote unquote trapped into a conversation or a relationship contractually is really dangerous. And that's when our friends like Taft Law or Marcus Harris gets involved, and we do some expert witness work. But the goal is to always kind of avoid that, right? And avoid all of those different pieces. So those are some great insights to kind of follow up on Amanda's conversation. We have our phase 0 planning checklist, which is available on our thought leadership section of the website, and you can scan the QR code on your screen. That is a free download that kind of takes you through each one of these. You can also go on our vendor relations playlist on our YouTube channel. And that gives you a bunch of different content from our thought leaders and our team here globally at Third Stage to look at how do you actually have a dynamic and successful relationship with a partner that has a specific agenda. So we have a variety of different keynotes and videos that we've done on that. So definitely check that out if this conversation resonates with you. But thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And we know,
Thank you.
yeah, we'll see you again, of course, now that you are a
Of
director
course.
here at Third Stage. So congratulations again on that. And then you
Thank
can,
you.
yeah, you can tune into more of Amanda or our podcast by visiting either transformationgroundcontrol.com or our short form podcast you can find anywhere you get podcasts, which is Digital Stratosphere. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.